So now I'm going to hand it over to Frank Lotterle, who is with the MnDOT State Rail Passenger Office, to give us an update on some very exciting developments. Frank, take it away.
Thank you, Brian. As you know, I work for the Minnesota Department of Transportation in the Office of Freight Commercial Vehicle Operations, and I supervise the rail and freight planning section, which includes managing passenger rail activities. So, I want to talk about three different things today: the second train to Chicago, NLX, and the state rail plan. First of all, in terms of the second train to Chicago, I think everybody knows here already that we have funding in place to build the capital improvements that have been requested by Canadian Pacific to allow operation of an additional Amtrak train between Chicago and St. Paul. We are in the stage of the process right now is basically we're doing a lot of agreements. We have to put together several different agreements in order to manage the operation of the train. First of all, we're working very closely with Wisconsin Department of Transportation on the development of the final engineering and the construction of the improvements. Now, you should know that the federal grant, the CRISI grant that is supporting this project is actually something that is between FRA and WSDOT. They actually applied for the grant. We have an agreement in place between WSDOT and MnDOT as to how to manage the construction and the payment for these engineering improvements. We have selected a firm, a team of HNTB and HDR to do the engineering work. And they haven't, the kickoff for that is in the next 2 or 3 weeks, in which they will actually start performing the work. Up to this point, we've had to go through the procurement process. We've had to negotiate the contract. We're at the point now where we're ready to begin the work on the engineering. So the engineering process is underway. We will begin actual work here in a couple weeks. Another thing that we are working on is an operating agreement between WSDOT and MnDOT in terms of how we share the cost of running the train. Now, as you know, the second train, being a state-supported train, means that the states are responsible for making up the shortfall between the fares and the overall operating cost. So we are in the process of negotiating an agreement between Illinois, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. So since we don't have that agreement in place, I can't share the details with you, but I believe that we've got a fair proposal in place. And again, in this negotiating and agreement phase, we're working on getting in place the formal agreement to share amongst the 3 states the cost of operating the train. In addition, we have to have an agreement with Amtrak. And we've been negotiating with Amtrak. We're in the very early stages, but one of the things that we determined just recently is that, in fact, we will have a separate agreement with Amtrak between Minnesota. There'll be an agreement between Minnesota and Amtrak, Wisconsin and Amtrak, and Illinois and Amtrak. We are working on as part of our state-to-state agreement, we're working on the details of how we're going to share the responsibility of overseeing the second train. MnDOT is going to, reserve some rights to make decisions, and we have to work with WSDOT to figure out how we're going to share those responsibilities. I wish I could share more details, but we are in the middle of discussing that, so I can't give you too much, but other than to say that we're going to certainly do what we need to do to represent Minnesota in that. One thing that is a little different perhaps than what you might have heard in the past is that as part of the Canadian Pacific's effort to merge with the Kansas City Southern, Canadian Pacific has been looking around for support. They approached Amtrak and asked for their support for the merger. And so there is an agreement in place between Amtrak and the Canadian Pacific that basically says that in exchange for, Amtrak support, that CP is willing to allow passenger rail service in a couple of corridors before all of the engineering work is done. So what that means for the second train is that rather than waiting for all of the improvements that we've and have agreed to with Canadian Pacific says, well, you can go ahead and start the train early. Well, that kind of puts our work, it's certainly turned everything on its head, when we found that out, because now, in addition to just working on the engineering, now we have to actually work with Amtrak to figure out how they're going to run the train. Now, Amtrak has been very excited about starting service as soon as they can, but as soon as they can is still going to take a little bit of time. At this point in time, we think that we will be able to start an initial level of service perhaps by the beginning of the calendar year. This may only be 3 trains. But as I say, Amtrak is very interested in getting something on the ground as quickly as possible. So I was hoping that by today I would be able to share a few more details about what that would look like. But Amtrak has, ball is in their court right now to provide us with a detailed proposal. And I don't have any of that information in hand. And once we get it, I need to, spend some time reviewing that. But over the next couple of months, what's going to happen, with us, what we're going to be doing is working with Amtrak to define what do they mean exactly by initial service? What days of the week are they proposing? What exactly will the schedule be? Where are the crew changes going to be? All of the nitty-gritty details of how this service is actually going to be conducted. We will be working with Amtrak over the next couple of months to figure that out. And our hope is that we will be able to be providing service here instead of in 2 years, within the next few months. And when I say the beginning of the calendar year, that's a real shot in the dark at this point. And I want you to understand that there is nothing firmly in place yet, but we are working very hard with Wisconsin and Illinois and Amtrak to make this happen early. So that's my report on the second train. One thing that I do want to point out is that we did not anticipate having to pay operating costs this quickly. So the governor has $740,000 in his supplemental budget to pay for the initial operating cost. And then we're going to have to secure operating funding to continue to operate the train past this first year. The proposed start date for the second train, there is no specific date for starting the train. We are negotiating that right now. We don't have a proposed date at this time. What we are saying is that we believe that we can get service potentially at the beginning of next calendar year. And again, nothing is firmly in place yet. That's the negotiation. That's what Amtrak is trying to propose. We're not ready to agree to that yet. We need to work on the operating plan. We are waiting for Amtrak to provide us with the details on what exactly they're proposing. So the good news is that we think that we can get service started earlier than we expected, but we were right in the middle of the very detailed discussions with Amtrak and with Wisconsin on figuring out how to do that. So Brian, I was just going to respond to John Dillery that we haven't selected the days of the week, and I see your suggestion that we should have weekends as the priority. That's certainly something that we're going to consider. As I said, we're waiting for Amtrak to provide their initial proposal. We're not necessarily going to accept their initial proposal as it is, but I will definitely keep your suggestion in mind as we talk with Amtrak.
All right, now let's get to our passenger rail report.
Good morning, everybody. Glad to see all the faces here, and glad to be moving in the spring of getting this project moving forward at a warp speed. Just want to touch base on the legislative stuff Kevin had mentioned a little bit. The House has passed their omnibus transportation bill. The governor recommendations are fairly consistent with that. The Senate is working on their omnibus transportation bill, and they have a different opinion to passenger rail. They've zeroed out everything for not only funding our office, but also for operating support that the governor and the House are recommending. Our political friends on the call, and also folks that know, this is sausage making season at the legislature. So if you like to watch and make sausage, tune into PBS or House TV. You'll find it. But I'm encouraged that we're going to be able to move forward with funding for the TCMC. Our ability to start this sometimes towards the end of the year, first of next year, is reliant on us having our share of the operating cost identified. As you know, we received the restoration and enhancement grant from the FRA to help support the operations of this for the first 3 years on a scale of 80, 60, 40 federal money declining. And on the fourth year, the states have to pick up the subsidy that isn't recovered by fare boxes. So we're working on cost sharing agreements right now with WSDOT that are part of the restoration grant. We're working on other documents as well for the restoration enhancement grant, but it's essential that we get funding out of the legislature to support this. As a reminder, we didn't anticipate being able to start service till December of 2024, and we have an opportunity to advance that significantly. And so our approach was not to go to legislature this biennium to look for a sustainable funding source or operating funds for this corridor, but to wait to the next legislative session. Fortunately for us, the governor had a supplemental budget and included the funding for TCMC operations. And I know this is an old song and dance I always share with you folks, but we've proposed before internally a state rail fund that would not only support operations, but also fund our ability to continue to look at expanding corridors and connecting services and those type of things. And it just hasn't gotten any traction. Annually get numbers from the Department of Revenue, and we'd fund that rail fund by the taxes that the freight railroads pay into the state. Not that they pay to local governments, but to the state, into the general fund. Anything passenger rail related is funded out of general fund. We can't use any other sources of MnDOT monies for that. And the latest numbers I've gotten from Department of Revenue show that the estimated property tax is about 19.7 million for 2022. And if we took 10% of that, that's 1.9 million. And we're looking at a sustainable fund. And our proposal would be to start the fund at a low percentage, 10%, and then maybe go to 20, 40, 60, to eventually having the fund transfer 100% of those taxes to the state. The freight railroads benefit because they're getting improvements to their infrastructure. We benefit because we have a sustainable funding source to look at other corridors and to cover operating costs and other capital costs. So we proposed this before. Right now, our focus is hopefully getting the funding for the first 3 years of operation for TCMC. But the sustainable funding source would be the answer for that. It'd fund our office even, so we wouldn't have to do a separate appropriation. So we're looking, these things just don't happen. You have to have staff to do it. And Frank is doing yeoman's work in learning how to make these agreements happen and all the technical aspects of even adding one round trip a day to an existing corridor. So we know that eventually we're going to have to get the sustainable funding in place for us to move forward with a program, not just a corridor by corridor. And like I said, we're moving ahead on all these other documents necessary to access the federal grants. And with that, I think I'll just roll it over to Frank. And if I think of something at the end, I'll pipe in again. So thanks, guys.
Well, thanks, Dan. And what I have to report on is we're kind of following a double track, pun intended, course here in terms of implementing TCMC. And one, of course, is that, we have committed to engineering improvements for the Canadian Pacific to, and the reasoning that I always like to give to people is that the reason for these engineering improvements is to allow us to operate our passenger train on time, reliably, on schedule, while not interfering with freight traffic. That is the purpose of these engineering improvements. We do have an engineering firm, a team of HNTB and HDR under contract. Technically, the team is under contract to WISDOT, but we are certainly participating with that. That contract has been finalized. The work is underway. The design team has had surveyors out, which involves the Canadian Pacific providing flaggers. So Canadian Pacific is cooperating with this. So the work for completing the final design of the engineering improvements, the track improvements that we've committed to, is underway. It's still going to take several months, perhaps not until the middle of next year before that's done. But it's moving, and it's moving forward pretty well. But the other track is working with Amtrak to actually figure out how they're going to operate the train. We have this sort of general idea that we're going to have a train that operates between Chicago and St. Paul, and we have a general idea what the schedule is, but we're at the point right now where we're having detailed technical discussions with Amtrak on, well, what does that mean exactly? How many crew people are on the train? How many cars? Where is the crew base? All of these little details. And we have an initial proposal from Amtrak. We've got some issues that we need to work through. I can tell you that the process is moving forward, but I can't give away a whole lot of details just yet because it is something that we need to kind of work with Amtrak confidentially. But I will tell you that we're on track for what we're saying right now is the beginning of next calendar year. We might be able to do it sooner, but I don't want to overpromise. But Amtrak is motivated to get the service started as soon as they can. The challenge that they don't have all of the equipment that they need to operate a full service, and they don't have the personnel. So we are discussing an initial schedule that would involve 3 round trips a week. And one of the details that we're discussing is, what are those days? I can tell you that at least that there will be weekend service as part of this. But basically my message to you today is we're having those discussions. We're talking about the details. We're moving forward very quickly with finalizing this. And one of the issues too, of course, is that we're not the only ones talking to Amtrak. We had a meeting earlier this week that involved both Illinois and Wisconsin talking with Amtrak. So we also have to understand the point of view of those 2 other states as well. So bottom line is we're moving forward. We're going to have some sort of initial service by the beginning of the year. It'll probably be 3 trains, 3 round trips a week. Then we would probably move to a full 7-day-a-week service. Perhaps, and again, just a guess, perhaps the middle of next summer. But again, I don't want to overpromise. All I'm saying is that that is our objective, and that's what we're working towards. So, Dan?
If we are able, and I'd be glad to be on a call with Kevin and working with Amtrak on trying to get some equipment here, at least 1 car, the new Venture cars, of which is behind me in my screen, which is quite a bit different. Single level, and it's quite a bit different than the Empire Builder. And it'd be nice to have this, a car, a static display of one car there at train day, so folks can see what this will be like. Bigger windows for the scenic ride along the river than the Empire Builder, or even the current Horizon cars. But it's all new, modern. It's not your old Amtrak fleet. So we'd like to work with Kevin if he's going to have discussions with Amtrak on that. I know we've kind of talked about it on and off in the past, having some big kickoff event when we do start the service. So we're looking at that as well. But train day is a good opportunity for folks to see that this isn't your dad's train anymore. Mm-hmm. And we're pretty happy about being able to do that, and look forward to continuing to move forward. Frank touched lightly on the amount of meetings we're having almost daily with WSDOT and or Amtrak to move this project forward. Kevin's involved with some of those as well, and really feel good about the direction we're going. It's been a long road to get us to this point. Now we just need to cross that final railroad crossing. So thank you.
Thanks both Dan and Frank for those updates. My question will be, and I think I ask this every month, especially in the legislative session, is there anything that we can do to assist you? Is there an area that you think we should put a little pressure? Not holding it to it, or nor will we report to your boss, but remember, we're an arm that can do some advocacy on your behalf, because we want to see you fully funded, your office funded, and our advancement of passenger rail. So just open to any thoughts or ideas there.
Well, the commission is going to do what the commission is going to do, and I think you touched on a lot of points of things that you could help us support, and that's about as far as I can go on advocating. So.
Great. So I'll just say on behalf of ourselves, we are thankful for both you, Dan and Frank, for this work, and want to make sure that we can be supportive. And commission members, it never hurts to reach out to our legislative body, especially now, to make sure that they're prioritizing passenger rail, fully funding the MnDOT office for passenger rail, so that we can expand this work. And so I'd encourage you to do that.
Madam Chair, could I ask a question
Yes,
of Frank and
please.
Dan? And I think I know the answer, but maybe the other members don't. Given the legislature's reluctance to put together a stable, sustainable funding source for operating the second train, and even their desire to zero out everything for passenger rail in 2023, does that jeopardize receipt? You've had the official signing of the Chrissy grant. Does it jeopardize anything in terms of should the state just drag its feet in providing operating funds, its share of operating funds for the second train?
Well, we wouldn't be able to start service any earlier until we get our share of the operating cost. The Restoration Enhancement Grant requires a participation from us, and we would not be able to do our part. So there might be the FRA money there might be the WSDOT money sitting there, but there won't be Minnesota money, so we can't operate the service any earlier. I will say one thing I forgot on the Restoration Enhancement Grant. It was a 3-year grant with a declining amount of federal participation over 3 years. The new IIJA program that has the Restoration Enhancement Grant extends that support for 6 years. And we're looking at, once we have the current Restoration Enhancement Grant in place, then potentially having an amendment to that to access some of the new Restoration Enhancement Grant money to extend that operating support out for a few more years. So that's a real preliminary discussion. The first thing is getting the current grant we have from the feds in place, and then going from there.
Well, our thoughts are that we're going to try to initiate 3 round trips a week early in calendar year 2023. So that would be the first quarter. Again, this is speculation at this point. It's what our goal is. But yes, that's what we're shooting for. Oh, I don't know. I wouldn't characterize the discussions between the states as dragging out. Just the opposite, that it's going pretty well. We're going as fast as we can. We really haven't hit any bumps in the road, but I just like to be conservative and cautious in the promises that I make. That's all.
All right. No other questions, Frank and Dan? It looks like you are off the hook for the moment. Thank you very much.
The truth is that MnDOT is not really doing very much right now. Our supporters on the Passenger Rail Alliance in Duluth are very, very active this year, trying to get funding through the legislature. We're providing the Alliance and our supporters with as much information as we can. I think that when Representative Hausman comes on, she can discuss more details about that funding effort, but we are, of course, ready to support that effort as well.
And now it's time for Scott Rogers, who chairs the West Central Wisconsin Rail Coalition and is also part of the Midwest Interstate Rail Passenger Coalition, to give us an update on what's happening around us in the Midwest from passenger rail development perspective. So Scott Rogers, you are on.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Brian, for the opportunity and to talk about these things today. My name is Scott Rogers. I'm the Vice President of Governmental Affairs at the Eau Claire Area Chamber of Commerce, just east of Minnesota. As Brian mentioned, I'm also chair of the West Central Wisconsin Rail Coalition. And then I guess my role today really is more in my position as one of the commissioners for the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission representing Wisconsin. The commission has already been mentioned by a couple people already, including Representative Hausman, who is also a commissioner. Each state that participates can appoint up to 4 people, 2 from the legislature and 2 appointed by the governor. And in my case, I'm the private sector representative for the state of Wisconsin. Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission, if you're not familiar with it, is essentially the successor to the Midwest Regional Rail Initiative. You may remember from the 1990s, which talked about developing passenger rail service in the upper Midwest. This commission was actually formed by compact among the states in 2000, and each state actually passed legislation creating the commission, appointing commissioners, contributing to the budget, et cetera. The current states that are participating are Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, North Dakota, and Wisconsin. And as Representative Hausman mentioned, many of those states are led by Republican governments. And so when we have our meetings, we have states like Kansas, Indiana, North Dakota, Missouri, where those legislative representatives are Republicans, and they're very involved and positive about passenger rail service in their states. The role of the commission really is to coordinate interaction among those states in developing passenger rail service, helping to look at how plans can work across state lines. It also provided the legislative authority for some of the Midwest states to jointly own, manage, and maintain equipment. So if you've heard of the venture cars that are in the process of going into service that were built by Siemens, also the fleet of locomotives, that was done through the authority here. We understand they are starting service on the Chicago to St. Louis corridor. They will soon be in service in Chicago to Milwaukee. And in fact, Wisconsin had an additional order for, I believe it's 6 more coaches and 3 cab cars that'll be coming online a little bit later. So some of the latest developments, the MIPRC Commission meets in person about once a year. Most recently, we met in Chicago and Detroit last fall. In Chicago, there was actually a news conference for the release of the FRA Midwest Plan that has already been mentioned as well. It's a very long-term 40-year outlook for where passenger rail service might develop in the Midwest. What's notable for our region is that the Chicago, Milwaukee, Madison, Twin Cities route was identified as one that had the justification for future true high-speed rail core express as that moves forward. So that FRA study was initiated in part because of the request by the MIPRC. And so some of the next steps on that are for legs, if you will, to be put on, put some tracks on that study. It's very long range, very high level. And the commission is working on with a consultant to do a grant request to take that study and then look at the various state rail plans in the Midwest, that study, and develop a implementation plan for it. And that really dovetails with something happening with the IIJA, or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which we really haven't had time to talk about today, but that's that unprecedented federal investment that is coming over the next 5 years. It does include a corridor identification program that will roll out over 5 years, and FRA, we understand, will be coming out with its rules and process for what that's going to look like sometime in May. So that's something we'll be anticipating. The IIJA also includes provisions that increase the importance of interstate commissions. And so the MIPRC right now is working on how that will play into effect for our Midwest states. But we actually are one of 2 already existing entities that already qualify as commissions under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So the commission next meeting is tentatively being planned for November after the election. And we're looking at doing it in Normal, Illinois, where that's on the Chicago to St. Louis corridor, where they've had a significant development in that city because of the corridor and new station facilities there and their downtown. And in fact, their mayor, I believe, was just nominated for the Amtrak board. Other things that are going on, Frank Lotterle talked about the Minnesota rail plan. Wisconsin DOT right now is doing its plan internally, its plan update. We understand that they will be releasing their draft sometime this spring or early summer, and then there'll be some public outreach. And then the Amtrak Connexus plan was also mentioned, and we do understand that for Minnesota and Wisconsin, that Amtrak is actively right now doing analysis of that, of the routes that are on the Wisconsin State Rail Plan in particular, which would include ways to obtain service for Madison, the corridor up to the Fox Cities in Green Bay, service to and through Eau Claire as well. And that will be out likely sometime this year. And then Frank also mentioned the agreement between Amtrak and Canadian Pacific. It's also a little bit broader for Wisconsin. It does allow for an 8th Hiawatha, as some of the Hiawatha service between Chicago and Milwaukee, as some of the current improvements are being done in Wisconsin, which include a second platform at the Milwaukee Airport Station, the freight bypass in Milwaukee itself, and some other improvements. And then I've had a chance to look at that agreement, and it also does include provisions for the 3rd Chicago to Twin Cities train as the current planned capital improvements are made. Finally, the question actually was asked about the Eau Claire to Twin Cities corridor. One of the developments there is within the last year, 3 of the counties, St. Croix, Dunn, and Eau Claire, and 6 municipalities, including Altoona, Eau Claire, Menominee, New Richmond, and Hudson, passed resolutions to form the Chippewa-St. Croix Passenger Rail Commission. In fact, Kevin has been a little bit helpful with us there, sharing some things about the Great River Commission and how it's organized. The commission just met last week and passed its bylaws and is planning to have its first in-person meeting sometime in May, and we're in the process of getting that set. So we continue to work on that, and there's a lot of interest and excitement in our area and throughout Wisconsin for future passenger rail service. So those are a few quick updates about what's going on that I know about, and can answer any questions when we get to that next section as well.
Great,
Brian-
thank you very much.
Brian,
And so with that,
Brian, I see one of the concerns expressed in
yeah,
the
go
chat
ahead.
one of the concerns expressed in the chat is one that I share, and that is all of those other states that have their act together and that are acting in a bipartisan way are ready to move ahead and apply for all of that federal money available. We have more federal money available for passenger rail than I think we've historically had. And that's why I haven't given up yet on funding those 4 studies that Frank talks about, because Frank says we can't apply for that federal money until we get those 4 studies done. So my motivation is there to see how can we get that funding before the end of this session.
If I could make a comment too, I appreciate that. And one of the things maybe that's worth emphasizing too is the money available in the IIJA. First of all, it is competitive grants, so that's a challenge. But one of the programs that was included that maybe hasn't been talked about as much, the TCMC is taking advantage of the previous Restoration and Enhancement Grant program, but in the new bill, it's even better. So there's a 6-year declining federal support for operating side. And it actually is 90% the first year, and then it goes down, but it gives the states and localities a lower entry point and much less financial risk in getting a new service started. So that might provide some persuasion in terms of the risk to a state or a locality in getting a service started.